I've established before in the past my disappointment with the 2023 animated movie The Boy and the Heron. This movie was my introduction to the works of Studio Ghibli and more specifically Hayao Miyazaki. I had heard so many things about how Miyazaki was apparently one of the greatest animators of all time, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time in general. He was like an animation legend, stuff like that. I heard so much about this guy, and yet I had never seen any of his movies. And so naturally, as an animation fan, that made me interested in checking out his work. I understood that it would likely be different from what I was accustomed to. These are Japanese movies, anime, which is like, being American, growing up with cartoons, not watching anime much as a kid. It was obviously going to be a different experience. I went with The Boy and the Heron just because of recency bias, and also because it won Best Animated Feature over one of the only good movies that come out of 2023, which only made me even more curious as to how this movie was. And although The Boy and the Heron is far from a bad movie, I don't think it's a masterpiece either. It has a lot of things in it that could make it a masterpiece, but unfortunately it just doesn't reach that potential. It doesn't fulfill that potential of being a masterpiece. I've already made an entire video going over my thoughts on the movie, which you could check out after this if you want to know more. But I don't want to bore you with what I think of this other movie. You clicked on this video for one reason, and I'm gonna give you that reason. Even though I was disappointed with The Boy and the Heron, it didn't turn me away from wanting to watch Miyazaki's other work. If anything, it made me even more interested in checking out his other work. Prior to actually watching The Boy and the Heron, I heard so much stuff from people that some people thought it was an amazing movie, it was like among his best movies, but I also came across a few people that said for Miyazaki standards, it wasn't one of his better movies. And so I figured the right thing to do would be to check out his older, more unanimously acclaimed movies to get a better idea of what he's capable of. Because even though I didn't like The Boy and the Heron, I saw potential with this man's filmmaking. I saw potential. Maybe this guy is one of the GOATs after all for animation. And so I went ahead and bought 8, yes, count 'em, 8 of his movies. And we're going to be talking about one of these movies. And now it's worth noting, at the time of making this video, I've only seen one of these movies in full, and that's also the movie that we're going to be talking about today. I also watched half of one movie, but I never finished it, and the other 6 movies I just haven't touched yet at all. I've been extremely busy with a lot of other things, so I don't have the time to just binge watch marathon these 8 movies. I began my proper Miyazaki journey with Spirited Away from 2001, which was supposedly his magnum opus, one of the greatest animated movies ever made, one of the greatest movies ever made in general, as a matter of fact. And I'll be the judge of that, thank you very much. Whenever I get around to watching these other movies, I might make videos on them, but that's only if I have new stuff to say about them. I don't want to watch a movie and then feel obligated to make a video on it if there's nothing for me to add to the table, If I watch Kiki's Delivery Service and I think, yeah, that was a great movie, and then I make a video on it, it's what could I say about it that no one else has already said about it? If I don't have anything new to add to the table, then I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to make a video on it because I don't see the point in doing that. And so, on a random night, I started watching Spirited Away for the first time, and I'm just going to cut straight to the chase. I think Spirited Away is a really good movie. I think it is a strong animated movie. And yet, I couldn't help but feel that there's just something missing from this movie. Something that prevents me from calling it one of the greatest animated movies ever made. I thought the movie was really good, but I didn't think it was on that level where it was yeah, this is one of the greatest animated movies ever made. That doesn't mean that I think the movie is bad, but it did, I guess it kind of like, it was different from what I expected. I went into this movie completely blind, okay? I knew nothing about Spirited Away. I knew nothing about this movie except for the fact that, like, oh, this was one of the greatest animated movies ever made. It's a masterpiece and whatever. And so, like, when you have these extremely high expectations, you go into it and you're expecting those high expectations to be fulfilled. And yeah, I could say for the most part they were fulfilled, but not enough for me to say, yes, indeed, this is one of the greatest animated movies ever made. It's great, but it's not on that level. A few of the problems that I have with The Boy and the Heron are also present with Spirited Away, and not to the same extent, of course, but they are still there. Generally, I think this movie is better than The Boy and the Heron. I think this is a much better, much stronger movie than The Boy and the Heron. In my review of The Boy and the Heron, I criticized the movie for having a rather slow pace to it, to the point where it felt like certain scenes would just drag on and on and on, never ending seemingly. That problem is still there with Spirited Away, but not to the same extent. There were moments in this movie where it's like, this is a slow movie, and you know that's fine. Watching this movie, it made me realize, maybe this is Miyazaki's style. Maybe this is like his trademark thing that makes him different from other animators, other filmmakers. His movies are meant to be slow paced, and I respect that. I got nothing against that at all. I'm not gonna complain and say that, like, oh, he should make fast paced, action packed movies full of Marvel jokes and whatever in them. These movies would be better if they had Family Guy Subway Surfers clips playing in the bottom right corner of the screen. I'm not saying anything like that at all. I'm not going to criticize Miyazaki for the way that he makes his movies, but I'm obviously not accustomed to this, to having movies that are this slow with the pacing. It's not as bad as with The Boy and the Heron, but watching this movie, there are like certain moments where it feels like it just kind of drags on, and you just want something interesting to happen. Something to help keep you engaged with the movie's plot. And on that side note, it's not necessarily the fact that it's slow paced. I don't got a problem with slow paced movies as long as the storyline is interesting. As long as there are interesting things that are going on in the movie, I'm fine with it being slow. Which brings me to my next point, the storyline of this movie. And now, I think that this movie has a better, more strong storyline than The Boy and the Heron. Believe it or not, stuff actually happens in this movie, so that automatically makes it leagues better than The Boy and the Heron. And yet, I can't help but feel that, like, some of the problems that I had with The Boy and the Heron story, they're also present in this movie. Not to the same extent again, but they're still kind of there. And again, this could just be Miyazaki's style of filmmaking, and if that's the case, then I'm not going to criticize him for that, but it prevents me from being able to click with these movies a lot more. Much like with The Boy and the Heron, the storyline of this movie is just all over the place. There are too many things that happen in this movie. There's no sort of like structure to the movie's storyline. Nothing feels like linear or straightforward. It's just random things happen. It's just all over the place, I could give you a very vague, brief summary of this movie's plot, but I would be missing a lot of details, and I mean a lot of details. A girl is with her parents as they're driving to a new house, I believe. They're moving somewhere, and they come across this abandoned town. As the family walks around the town, the parents come across this all-you-can-eat buffet, and so they start to eat. Very quickly, though, it becomes nighttime, and so you have all of these different ghosts and fantastical creatures appear, and so the girl tries to get the parents to come with her, but they've become pigs. And so now it's up to the girl to save her family and get away from this ghost town. That's about like 30% of the plot I just gave you, 35%. There are tons of other details in this movie's storyline, but it's impossible to just give you a simple description of what this movie is about, because there are so many things that happen in this movie, and that's probably Miyazaki's style. And you know what, I'm not against that necessarily. I acknowledge that it's not for me personally, it's not for my taste, but I'm not criticizing it for it. It was a problem in Boy and the Heron because there was almost nothing that happened for like the first 40 minutes of The Boy and the Heron. It wouldn't be until like midway into the movie, like after an hour into this 2-hour movie, that's when things start to get interesting. Whereas with here, at least, I'm interested in what's going on for the most part, but it's like too much stuff to take in. It's like, they go into one plot and then they go into another plot. It's like, it doesn't feel linear. I brought up in the Boy and the Heron video that like, it felt like a bunch of different movies stitched together, and that's kind of the same thing with this movie. I'm not saying this stuff as a negative. I'm not saying this to say like, oh, I hate this movie, I think this movie's bad. I'm saying this because maybe these movies aren't for me. I don't know. Like, The Boy and the Heron could be a bit understandable for me to not like that movie all that much, but this is supposedly one of the greatest animated movies ever made. This is supposedly his magnum opus, and I think this is a great movie. It's strong, but I'm not able to like connect with it. I kind of expected more out of it, maybe. I thought I would be moved from this movie, I'm not gonna lie. I thought like I would cry watching this movie. Considering how acclaimed this movie is, I thought it was gonna be something like that. Like, it would make me cry, it would have like themes in them, There's nothing really like that in the movie. I apologize for frequently bringing it up in this video, but I have to mention it constantly in order for you to truly understand how I feel about Spirited Away. It's kind of important in a way. But like, The Boy and the Heron had these like themes of life and death in them. And even though I didn't think these themes were well executed, I did see that potential there. There was potential for it to be good, for it to be emotional. There wasn't really anything like that with Spirited Away. There was no point where I was like, oh man, I'm gonna cry watching this. There's no like themes in this movie, I don't think. I mean, to be fair, you don't necessarily have to be emotional or have themes in your movie in order to be critically acclaimed, but still, with how much I saw people talk about this movie, I thought I would cry watching this movie. I'm not even gonna lie. I mean, to be fair, this is just me. I'm sure there are people that have cried watching this movie, and I got no problem with that at all. The one thing I will say about Spirited Away is that it is absolutely gorgeous to look at. I love the imagery of this movie, much like with The Boy and the Heron. Watching this movie made me realize, maybe it's not necessarily the storyline that makes Miyazaki's movies acclaimed. Maybe it's just the weird, surreal imagery that they have. People don't go into Miyazaki's movies for the storyline necessarily. They go into it because of the weird, interesting visuals that they have, the different, unique imagery that these movies have. I've said a lot of things about Spirited Away in this video, but I will say that I've never seen another movie like it. There is no other animated movie that I could think of that's like Spirited Away. It is a one-of-a-kind animated movie, and even though I don't think it's a masterpiece, it's not a 10 out of 10 masterpiece to me, I can respect it for that. I can respect it for that unique feel. On the other hand, though, I have a feeling that, like, maybe this movie is too unique to the point where it's like I'm not able to click with it. I don't see myself rewatching this movie, honestly. Like, yeah, it's gorgeous. I love the animation, but, like, I don't really feel much watching this movie. When I started watching this movie, I was excited to see what kind of masterpiece I would be getting into. I thought this would be like a life-changing movie or something like that. By the end of the movie, it felt like I was watching Spirited Away solely for the sake of saying I watched Spirited Away. Which, let me just say, this is not the kind of movie that I want to have that feeling for. If this was like Harry Potter or The Fast and the Furious or something like that, that would be a completely different story. But this is, again, supposed to be one of the greatest animated movies ever made, and so it's like, I want to click with it. I want to engage with it. I want to say that it is a masterpiece like everyone else does, but I can't. I cannot give it anything higher than like, this is a great animated movie. There's nothing wrong with this movie. There are no problems in it at all. This is technically a flawless movie in a way. Whatever problems I have with this movie, with like the slow pacing and the over-the-top plot, those could just be attributed to that being, you know, Miyazaki's style. That's how he makes his movies. And so it's like, rather than say that that's bad, Miyazaki sucks, whatever, I acknowledge that like, maybe this is just not for me. Maybe it's not my sort of thing. And yet, even though this is technically a flawless movie, I'm not able to like, I guess it's just different from everything else I've seen with animation, you know? When you grow up with like Pixar and whatever, and you go into this, it's like, it's a masterpiece, but it's like a different kind of masterpiece compared to like Toy Story, you know? Disappointingly, I don't see myself coming back to this movie. This feels like a one and done kind of movie. I'm not sure if Miyazaki is for me, to be honest, and that's probably fine. If I'm not able to engage with Miyazaki's work, then, you know, that's just it, you know? I think Spirited Away is an 8 out of 10 movie. Everyone else says it's a 10 out of 10, but I feel comfortable giving it an 8 out of 10. There's no particular reason why. There's nothing wrong with this movie, and yet for some reason, I'm not able to like connect with it enough for me to give it a 10 out of 10 and say like, this is the greatest animated movie ever. This is one of the greatest animated movies ever. At the same time though, and again, I brought this up in the Boy and the Heron video, I don't want to force myself. I don't want to put pressure on myself to give this thing a 10 out of 10 just because everyone else says it's a 10 out of 10. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10, and I feel comfortable giving it an 8 out of 10. Nothing higher, nothing lower. And let's be real, when the is an 8 out of 10 ever a bad rating for a movie? For anything in general, actually. At no point am I saying that this movie is bad or anything like that, you know? It's different from what I'm used to when it comes to animated movies. Maybe it's not my sort of thing, maybe it's not my preference, but I would never say that this is a bad movie. Far from it. I like to ridicule the whole animation is cinema thing, but like, I would say that this is cinema, even though I don't really like love it that much. I know that objectively, this is an animated movie that deserves to be called cinema. This is an animated movie that should be used as an example of how animation is cinema. And yet I'm not able to like 100% love this movie and call it one of the greatest movies ever made. You know, something that I could just keep coming back to over and over again. Maybe I'm too American to enjoy this movie. I'm not sure. I decided to do a bit of research on this movie, and I found out something interesting that could explain a lot of things. Apparently, this movie was made without a script. There was no script used at all to make this movie. Not only that, but this is apparently the case with Miyazaki's other movies. It's not just a one-time thing with Spirited Away. When a Miyazaki movie starts development, the storyline isn't 100% thought out yet. And so, he just comes up with new ideas to put into his movie as development goes on for the movie. According to Miyazaki, he doesn't make the movie makes itself, and he just follows along, which I'm not even gonna lie, that's really impressive. I want to imagine it is near damn impossible to make not one, but several different movies without a script at all. You just take whatever you could think of in your head and you just put it into your movie as you're further making it. And then somehow, just somehow, the final product isn't a bloated, incomprehensible abomination. Instead, they are some of the most acclaimed animated movies ever made. Even though Spirited Away and The Boy and the Heron have a lot of different things going on in them, they never felt bloated or cluttered or anything like that. And maybe The Boy and the Heron slightly feels bloated, but not really that much. And I didn't get that bloated feel watching Spirited Away, even though there was a lot of stuff going on in Spirited Away. If that makes sense. That is really impressive. I am not going to lie. I have even more respect for Miyazaki now because of this. It also explains greatly why the structure feels off in these movies to me. And even though now I know the reason why these movies feel kind of off, I still can't help but feel that, like, I still can't, like, connect with them that much. Like, now I understand the reason why, and I respect it even more, but I'm still, like, I'm not gonna say that, like, Spirited Away is a perfect 10 out of 10 movie. I still feel comfortable with having it as an 8 out of 10 movie. This also doesn't excuse the fact that nothing interesting happens for like the first 45 minutes of The Boy and the Heron. It kind of explains why that's the case, but that doesn't mean it's okay now all of a sudden. I'm just bringing up this entire thing because I feel like this might be the reason why I'm not able to love these movies as much as everyone else does. Even if they are great movies objectively, they're just not for me, and that's okay. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Adios.